Hello, Rob Venn here, and today we're going to be looking at Attitude magazine. This is for component 2 of AL Media Studies, Media in the Online Age. You need to be able to compare the website of Attitude, attitude.co.uk, with that of Zoella. So what you've got to be able to do is you've got to study not just the homepage of the websites, including the semiotics, so its use of images, its use of language, and of course any topical material. Bear in mind, of course, that websites are a dynamic product, unless it's Zoella, and they will change. So what I'm going to be looking at today might be different next time we have a look at it. So you need to be going onto the website yourself, and you need to be making your own notes about what you find on there and writing down case studies that you can use in the exam. It's okay if you've all got different examples. What you need to get from this video and from your class research is the broad strokes, the basic sort of like wider ideas that are at play. The actual specifics are just there as examples. It's not just the home page, mind you. You've got to look at their YouTube channel and any other participatory social media. So in this case, we're going to be looking at Facebook, we're going to be looking at Instagram and Twitter. We'll do that though as a separate video. Today we're just going to look at some background theory, and we're going to look at some of the background contextual information. So basically we're going to be looking at pretty much every theory. Semiotics and Roland Barthes going to be one of your most important. Not so much narratology, I don't suppose, but certainly genre. Binary Opposites and Structuralism by Levi Strauss is going to be a major theory here, because you're going to be having to analyze attitude in terms of the binary opposite of gay versus straight more than anything else. We're going to be looking at postmodernism. No, that's not a particularly important one. Theories of representation, though, Stuart Hall, very important. Gender performativity by Judith Butler. Power of media industries, Karen Seaton. Not so much regulation by Livingston and Lund, but it's there. Culture and industries by Hesmondhalgh, but also cultivation theory, media effects, reception theory, and of course fandom and end of audience theories. So pretty much the entire gamut of theories, to be fair. Right, but let's get the basics out of the way. First of all, we're looking at attitude.co.uk. That's the website we're going to be looking at. Attitude is a gay magazine. It's a gay lifestyle magazine, and it's been around since 1994. It's currently owned and published by Stream Publishing Limited. In terms of this information here, I got this from their media pack, which I've emailed you. The print magazine has a circulation of 50,000, which is pretty good for a monthly magazine. The digital circulation, so this means it's going to be circulated as a PDF copy as well. That's 12,207. So you're looking at 62,000 readers every month. Combined digital and print. Then we've got their online users, so we're looking at 1.8 million users a month, so way in advance of the actual print version of it, the actual magazine itself. The website's much more important when you look at it like that. Not to mention all the social media. I mean, there's 3.6 million page views, 120,000 followers on Twitter, 550,000 Facebook likes, 2 million YouTube views, and a newsletter subscription base of 42,000. So we're looking at a very, very large audience for what is essentially a quite niche magazine. Now, who are the audience for Attitude magazine and their website as well? Now, I got this from their media pack. It says, Attitude reaches a dynamic readership of affluent, fashion-conscious, brand-loyal men. Now, this is very similar to ordinary lifestyle magazines that are aimed at the heterosexual male audience, think GQ and Esquire. Attitude is essentially very similar to them, except that obviously has this specific niche of the gay audience. So the typical Attitude reader is a gay male professional, typically in his 20s or 30s, so quite young. They're financially prosperous with earnings considerably higher than the national average. So assume AB mostly, maybe C1, mostly AB. Attitude readers are early adopters. That means they like to purchase latest gadgets and engage in new technology. This makes them very similar to the wider lifestyle man's magazine market audience. They like to use their spending power to invest in products and services that represent his ideals in life, and he prides himself as a trendsetter. His high disposable income allows for multiple purchases within music, arts, entertainment, travel, and socializing. Attitude readers are highly loyal to the brands that advertise and speak to them through the gay press. They are very style conscious and take great pride in their appearance, regularly indulging in premium fashion, grooming, and luxury goods and items and products. Now, to a certain extent, you might say, well, that's very stereotypical, isn't it? I mean, the stereotype is that the gay men take a lot of, place a lot of importance on their appearance and on fashion and things like that. But again, this actually isn't radically different to the kind of audience that you're expecting from a magazine like GQ and Esquire. The only difference is that there's gay men. You may find that gay men who read Attitude might also read something like GQ and Esquire as well. Now, a bit of social context to put things in perspective. Let's not forget that until the Sexual Offences Act of 1967, homosexuality was illegal in Britain. It was only in 1967 that they decriminalised gay sex in England and Wales. It wasn't decriminalised in Scotland until the Criminal Justice Act Scotland of 1980, and it wasn't decriminalised in Northern Ireland until 1982. So we're looking at a subculture that was actively underground and hidden until then, because obviously there was a danger of them being arrested and imprisoned as criminals. We're looking at a culture that was considered deviant, they were outsiders. That, of course, has radically changed in the last 20 years. The age of consent was 21 for gay men until the Sexual Offences Amendment Act of 2000, which finally equalised the age of consent for both homosexual and heterosexual behaviours throughout the UK at 16. So, it's only been for the last 19 years they've had that level of equality. And the Same-Sex Marriage Act, Same-Sex Couples Act, what it's called, wasn't enacted until 2013. So it's literally only been 7 years since gay men and, lesbians as well, have had full equality and that kind of thing. So let's not forget that we're talking about a culture that has been very much oppressed. Having said that, if we look at the timeline of gay magazines here, there's been gay magazines around since 1896 in one way or another. I mean, this is internationally, obviously, I say internationally, it's mainly Britain and America. But as you can see, the key thing, Gay News is a very important magazine, Gay Times is a very important magazine. But Attitude's only been around since 1994, so it's pretty recent. Well, 25 years, obviously. Now, let's put this into theoretical perspective. Power in Media Industries by Curran and Seaton. The idea that the media is controlled by a small number of companies primarily driven by the logic of profit and power. Well, obviously the main point of a media company is to make profit. If they can't make profit, they can't exist. Don't forget that, magazines, like most media products, are essentially just adverts. They're there to sell products to the audience. That's how they pay for themselves. But I don't think that a gay magazine like this is really about power as such. It's really about creating a voice for the gay community as much as anything. The idea that media concentration generally limits or inhibits variety, creativity and quality. Well, Attitude magazine is independent, not part of a conglomerate, so you can't say that it's really, this is an example of media concentration, I guess. It's an example of media diversity. The idea that more socially diverse patterns of ownership help to create conditions for more varied and adventurous media productions. Well, the owner of Attitude magazine is himself a gay man, so perhaps that's what we've got here, an example of a more socially diverse patterns of ownership. It's not part of a conglomerate, it is more independent. This is the man who owns Attitude. This is Darren Styles, OBE. He's the owner of Stream Publishing. As you can see, what Stream mainly make is magazines that are company magazines. They're sort of like for, sort of like in-house magazines. People like Hertz Car Rental, Vauxhall Cars, Spar supermarkets, and cruise lines. So airlines. So we're talking about, it's not really mainstream, um, sort of like commercial magazines for a mainstream audience. They're, specifically industrial magazines. But when he was given the opportunity to buy Attitude, he bought it because as a gay man, he, remembered how Attitude was for him in his youth, an important magazine that essentially helped him to understand what it meant to be a gay man. So, he bought that out of a personal interest. Now, also when we're looking at cultural industries with Hesmondhalgh, he talks about the idea that cultural industry companies try to minimize risk and maximize audiences through vertical and horizontal integration, and by formatting their cultural products through the use of stars, genres, and serials. Well, it's not a conglomerate, but as we can see, Stream owns a bunch of different, well, I'd say it works with a bunch of different magazines, so you could call that kind of vertical integration. They're all in the business of magazines, but they're not horizontally integrated in the same way as someone like Disney is. Nor are they really vertically integrated, except in that they've got, obviously, they're a cross-platform brand. So it's not just a magazine, it's also a website, it's also Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. All of these things give it a degree of vertical integration to a certain extent, but it's not really the same as you'd expect from a proper conglomerate vertical integration. Having said that, they definitely use genreing, they also use stars. I mean, obviously we've got Madonna here, we've got Cher, we've got Taron Egerton. So they use stars to sell their products just like anybody else. The idea that larger companies or conglomerates now operate across a number of different cultural industries, well, again, with social media and the internet, that's sort of an example of that. So it's giving them a cross-platform brand, so they're no longer just a magazine, as we saw by the figures earlier. I mean, the magazine's only 50,000, but the website's 1.8 million. So what used to be a magazine and then had a website and had social media is now more like a digital platform that also has a magazine, if you want to look at it like that. The idea that the radical potential of the internet is being contained to some extent by the partial incorporation of a large profit-orientated set of cultural industries. The internet, once upon a time, was the Wild West. I mean, it was a place where you could have any sort of like community you wanted. It's like we talked about with YouTube, is now being taken over completely, well, not completely, but largely by conglomerates. Long gone are the days when the most popular thing on YouTube was, a sneezing panda. Now it's, all music videos made by some conglomerate music company. But, yes, we can say that in the respect that Attitude's website might have replaced more independent gay websites, but, it probably just operates in parallel with them. On the idea of a rather radical nature, once upon a time homosexuality was a radical act. It was literally illegal. Now, in the last few years, it's become increasingly accepted, and it's no longer considered the deviant behaviour it once was. As we, as a society, become more, as Jean-Francois Lyotard would say, incredulous towards meta-narratives. This idea that, heterosexual, patriarchal culture is the norm, normative behaviour in inverted commas, is starting to be challenged when we start to see more diversity. So, the degree to which you consider a gay magazine radical anymore is debatable. As we talked about, cross-platform brand, the actual magazine itself, the Facebook, the YouTube, the Instagram, the Twitter, it's all one big media brand. Obviously, you can see the branding. You know, the magazine has got its, you know, they're using this month's magazine cover as their, you know, their profile picture on across all platforms. They're using the same photographs of Taron Egerton, you know, again in Twitter, in YouTube, in Instagram, in everything, frankly. So it's got a cross-platform look. So no longer just a print magazine, which seems quite quaint in today's day and age. Interesting semiotics here of using pink for its masthead. You know, obviously um, the feminine connotations of the colour pink, linking to, you know, got it over here as well. We've got it down here, linking to ideas of gender roles, the pink and the blue. You know, semiotically interesting there. Upon the fact that it makes a nice contrast and pops really nicely. You know, I've talked to you before about how the colour pink and the semiotics of it has changed over time. You know, if we went back to the early part of the 20th century, pink was considered the most masculine of all colours. Then by mid-century, it's flipped on its head and become the you know, the most feminine of colours. You know, so you know, sort of like pink may be an example of feminising the representation of homosexuality. What else we got then? Genres. Okay, as we said, you know, it's a lifestyle magazine. Specifically, it's a gay men's lifestyle magazine. So it's not just that it's gay, it's specifically for men, so not for lesbians. It's a lifestyle magazine. What's that mean though? It's really to do with the tone of the magazine. I mean, a lifestyle magazine could be anything. We tend to think of lifestyle magazines being more like things like GQ, Esquire, um, Cosmo, Woman's Weekly, whatever. These kind of magazines which deal with a variety of different topics. So it's not something specific like, you know, Guitar World or, you know, Top Gear magazine. It's not something that specific. It covers a variety of things. Largely fashion, but not completely just fashion like Vogue is. So fashion, leisure, travel, health, fitness, and culture. So all of those things together are what make a magazine a lifestyle magazine. So we can look at the generic tropes and characteristics of what you'd expect from a lifestyle website that links with a magazine. Now the purpose of a lifestyle magazine is to help you to form your personal identity. It is essentially an instruction manual, like it says down here. The instruction manuals on how to obtain subcultural capital. Now what's subcultural capital? This is a theory by Sarah Thornton here. And a subculture is as a culture within a culture. So if we think of the normal mainstream, that's what's called the parent culture. So your, you know, your normative culture, what's the normal thing that you expect in your society? That's the parent culture. A subculture is a culture within that culture. Now, subcultures are often based around a shared interest. Now, that could be a taste in a particular kind of music. It could be a fandom surrounding a TV show like Star Trek or Doctor Who or Game of Thrones. It could be allegiance to a particular sporting team like, you know, Sheffield United versus Sheffield Wednesday. It could be, you know, well, just football or rugby or cricket or whatever it is you're interested in. The internet has made subcultures extremely fractured, obviously, because you can have an interest in absolutely anything you want. Now, in order to join a subculture, you need knowledge. You need to know what to be interested in. You need to know what to like, what to dislike, how to dress, how to talk, how to act, what place to go to, you know, where to hang out. You know, you need knowledge. Knowledge is power in a subculture. It's capital. Capital is something that can be traded. It's something that has value. So knowledge in a subculture is valuable. You know, knowing, you know, what the latest fashions are, what the latest look is, what's the latest gossip, what's the latest, you know, information that you need to become a part of that subculture, to be cool. So that's what it is really. Lifestyle magazines are instruction manuals on how to achieve a particular lifestyle, to get subcultural capital within that group that you want to be a member of. So in this case, the gay male lifestyle is a subculture within the wider parent culture. So that's what you're reading Attitude magazine for. You're reading Attitudes to learn how to be a gay man. Essentially, that's what it's for. Having said that, though, like I've said, it's not radically different to any other men's magazine. I mean, if we look at the websites here, we look at the menu bars, the one at the top for Attitude is not dissimilar to the one from GQ. Esquire's a lot more minimalist, but they've got a lot of things in common. Style, fashion, grooming, basically the same thing in it. So they're all really fashion magazines, ultimately. But not just that. They're not just fashion magazines, which separates them from something like Vogue. They've also got entertainment. They've got culture and art. They've got, so culture and design in this case, they go hand in hand. Here we've got entertainment, culture, theatre. We've got also travel. Down here we've got what interesting watches. Watches were a big thing in men's magazines. They are sort of like a signifier of success and wealth. They're like jewellery for women, basically. You know, we've got the culture element as well, so it's not just restricted to fashion. Interestingly, this one is much more minimalist. They've got food and drink on this one. Slightly older audience for Esquire, to be honest, compared with these two. But interesting, this one says boys, that one says women. So, you've got the same link there. So, Esquire's not objectifying, women in quite the same way as GQ is, or, boys is the same case of Attitude is. But just saying, the only thing that really separates Attitude from these two is that it's for gay men and these ones aren't. Other than that, they're very similar magazines. You can see that in the evidence of the fact that GQ's got Taron Egerton on the front cover this month, and so has Attitude, and for the same reason. He's playing Elton John in a new biopic called Rocket Man. Obviously, of particular interest to Attitude because it's about a gay man. Well, I'm pretty sure Taron Egerton isn't gay, which is interesting because, with today's day and age, people tend to get upset about straight man maybe playing a gay man. But, interesting to see what they think of it. So remember we said they're releasing instruction manuals. Well, what you're trying to achieve by reading these magazines is your ideal self. What Carl Rogers would call an ideal self. And the magazine is an instruction manual on how to achieve that ideal self. So that, in a lifestyle magazine, is usually achieved through consumption. It's through buying things. Now that could be clothes, it could be scents, or cosmetics, it could be things like gadgets or cars or anything. You've got to go out and buy stuff basically. And this is what this is saying, this week's hottest clothes and accessories, bank holiday special. Again, you could easily see that in Esquire or GQ and it wouldn't look any different. What is different is this, because what we've got here is a section on boys, just like GQ had a section on girls. Now what's interesting in this is about the way it represents gay men. Now we'll get onto that later on when we look at representations a little bit more. But the key thing here is it's a mixture of both ideal self and ideal partner. So when we see these representations of men here, the reader is meant to be looking at that and not just thinking, damn, he's fit. Yeah? Literally in terms of muscularity and in terms of sexual desirability. But also it's like, I too should look like that. So these characters are going to be representing both an ideal self and an ideal partner for the reader. Remember, ideal partner is not a theory by Carl Rogers. It's just something I'm extrapolating. You know, if you can have an ideal self, surely you can also have an ideal partner. Right. So this brings us on quite nicely to representation. So the first thing is, what is representation? Well, what we've got to remember is that the media shows us things about society, and it does that through mediation. You're not looking at a completely objective look at reality. What you're seeing in the media is someone's filtered ideas about reality. It's someone's opinion. Everything that appears on the Attitude website or on Zoella's website or blog or any other media product has been carefully chosen, formed, created and structured in order to communicate a preferred, hegemonic, dominant reading for the audience, as Stuart Hall would say. That's what mediation is. It's what the media does. It takes the world, repackages it, and re-presents it to the audience. Hence, representation. So just remember that. Nothing in here is random. Nothing in here is accidental. When you're looking at these media products, they are very, very carefully constructed to communicate meaning. And one of the ways they do that is through the use of stereotypes. Remember, Walter Lippmann coined this term in this context anyway. Preconceived, oversimplified idea of characteristics which typify a person, situation, etc. The attitudes that are based on those preconceptions, and any person who conforms closely to the idea of a type. So, obviously, you're going to be using stereotypes to construct representations in your magazine or in your website in this case. Equally, though, the audience members are going to themselves be trying to conform to that stereotype because they think that that's what's going to help them fit into the subculture. So remember, stereotyping isn't something that necessarily just happens to you. Sometimes you stereotype yourself. You're deliberately trying to fit into a stereotype. So, brings on to Stuart Hall and his representation theories. Representation is the production of meaning through language, so semiotics essentially from Roland Barthes' point of view, with language defined in the broadest sense as a system of signs, so literally semiotics. So we're looking here at not just what is written on the website, but how it uses images, how it uses colours, how it uses fonts, how it's laid out and designed, how it uses hyperlinks, has it got video, has it got audio, has it got any kind of moving elements, everything. The entire meaning working together to create meaning. So we will look at the relationships between concepts and signs. What signs are denoted? What are they connoting? How do audiences react to those? How do we interpret them as audiences? How do they use stereotypes as representations? Do they reduce people to a few simple characteristics or traits? So to what extent is attitude sticking to or promoting a narrow representation of homosexuality, or is it a diverse representation of homosexuality? We've also got to remember that stereotyping tends to occur when there are inequalities of power. Power inequalities are going to be a big thing when we look at attitude. Who has power, who doesn't have power. Subordinate or excluded groups are constructed as different or other. So remember that's Edward Said, which he was talking about race, but we can talk about it as in terms of any group that doesn't conform to the normative parent culture. Any subculture that is in some way transgressive or vilified or subjugated or oppressed, which of course gay men definitely fall into that category. Don't forget, we could always bring in Kimberly Crenshaw here. I mean, she talked about intersectionality. Now, she was talking about the fact that you can be triply oppressed if you're black, a woman, and poor. But we can extend that because there are other ways in which you can be oppressed within society or marginalized. What if you're gay? What if you're in some way differentially abled? you know, that can add even more levels of oppression onto a person. So, David Gauntlett's talking about the idea, if we extend that the media provides with tools or resources we use to construct our identities. Well, as we said, lifestyle magazines and the accompanying websites in this case are literally instruction manuals on how to achieve a lifestyle, on how to achieve subcultural capital, like Sarah Thornton said. The idea that in the past the media tended to convey singular, straightforward messages about ideal types of male and female identities, but the media today offers a more diverse range of styles, icons, and characters from whom we may pick and mix different ideas. So, as I was saying before, um, you know, until 1967, homosexuality was illegal. So they were literally an underground culture. They had to remain hidden as much as possible because they were, criminalized. Um, but that doesn't mean to say that gay men were completely absent from the media. Um, let's face it, British pop culture has long absolutely loved camp men, and drag acts. There's a long history of that in British comedy and vaudeville and entertainment. Um, so, it's not been completely hidden. But, nonetheless, if we can look, for example, here, this is a screenshot from Attitude this morning. Um, Here we've got a gay man's magazine talking about drag. Now, of course, it's interesting to compare this to the Grayson Perry article, Letter to My Younger Self, that we looked at in the big issue. But what's interesting here, in terms of gender performativity, so you can bring Judith Butler into this is a lesbian drag queen. So this is a gay woman performing an exaggerated stereotype of an over-the-top performative idea of femininity. Very, very kind of like postmodern in a way. It's a simulacra of a simulacra of a simulacra in a way, isn't it? It's a woman pretending to be a man pretending to be a woman in a way, or a woman acting in the way that men pretending to be women act. Very strange. I mean, let's not forget that being a drag artist doesn't necessarily make you gay, but those two things go hand in hand. So very talks with it's a perfect example of the performativity of gender and how that's blurring, and particularly in recent years, as we become more incredulous towards those meta-narratives of a singular attitude towards sexuality and gender identity. This is a nice one. Richard Dyer is another good theory to talk about. He talked about in-groups and out-groups. This is the difference between stereotypes and social types. Social types, or the other way around, social types and stereotypes. Social types are those who are like us. They're the in-groups, the ones that are acceptable, people who belong, people like us, in inverted commas. Out-groups are people who we other. They're people who are not like us. That can be scary to people. These are the kind of people who can have moral panics and folk devils made about them, which is something that's traditionally always happened to gay people. So, for a long time, homosexuals were out groups. They were literally criminal and deviant. Nowadays, they're increasingly being seen as in groups. The acceptance of gay marriage, literally only 7 years ago, shows that they've increasingly now become in groups. And the fact that it was, David Cameron's Conservative government that legalised gay marriage is significant, because even the political right wing no longer saw it as a controversial issue, and they're hardly the most liberal of governments. So it shows you how more and more homosexuality is becoming accepted as a norm, and simply not something that's a big deal. That's not to say that we don't still have an awful lot of homophobia in society, but nowhere near as much as there was only 15, 20 years ago. So, as I said, subculture, an identifiable subgroup within society or a group of people characterized by a shared belief or interest that's at variance of those of the larger group, with distinctive ideas, practices, or way of life of each subgroup. So, as we said, whilst in many ways Attitude magazine is a very mainstream magazine, like I said, it's hardly any different to GQ or Esquire. It's just that it's specifically aimed at gay men, which is the subculture, the subgroup that we're talking about. But to what extent does Attitude speak to or target all gay men, or does it particularly only target a certain stereotype of gay masculinity? Well, that remains to be seen. I like this. This amuses me. I like this because it illustrates the idea of subcultures quite nicely. Emo kids. They think they're non-conforming, but in the end they're conforming to non-conformity, which now looks like an emo. An emo's conformed to it. It's a perfect example of how subcultures are about finding a tribe to belong to. Now those tribes can be based around music, like the case of emo. It can be around a particular fashion. It can be around sport. It can be around something like fans of the comic books or Harry Potter or superhero movies, or it could be fans of I don't know Great British Bake Off. It doesn't matter. They're we find our tribes, and being in a tribe needs a uniform. It needs certain attitudes of how to behave, how to look, what kind of slang to use, how to dress, what music to listen to, what films to watch, what TV shows to watch, what books to read, what to create, where to go, where to hang out. Everybody ultimately is looking to conform, even if they're conforming in their non-conformity. Which is ironic, but true, because everyone wants to be part of a culture, and to gain access to that culture you need cultural capital, and that's where the websites and the magazines come in. Now let's get on to the representation of gender and sexuality. Now, one of the things we've talked a lot about is in terms of representation of gender. It's interesting in that even though quite a few of the cultural theorists we've been talking about, like Baudrillard, like Judith Butler, are themselves gay, we haven't got any particular queer theory on the syllabus as our main theories. So what we're ending up having to do is actually sort of like adapt some of the gender theory instead. And one of the key things we can look at, and this is something that Lisbeth van Zoenen talked about, but in particular, Laura Mulvey talks about, this is the idea of the male gaze, that women in particular are objectified. They are treated as objects. Subjectification is a notion central to feminist theory. It can be roughly defined as the seeing and or treating a person, usually a woman, as an object. Less as a person, but as a sex object. Someone who's there to be looked at. John Berger, in his seminal book, Ways of Seeing, talked about the way in which women are looked at and men act. The women are the receivers of the gaze from men. That men are active, that women are passive. Men act, in this case, as voyeurs. A voyeur is a person who gains sexual pleasure from watching others, so literally a male gaze, where women are sexualized. So a person who gains sexual pleasure from watching others while they're naked or engaged in sexual activity. But that is a very narrow reference and definition of voyeurism. Voyeurism basically just means the pleasure gained from watching others, usually surreptitiously. A more clinical term for it is scopophilia. Scop, to look, philia, to love. It's the love of looking, the love of watching. And voyeurism and scopophilia are at the base of all media, essentially. Um, but when it comes to the representations of women, women are gazed at as objects. Now, Laura Mulvey, when she talked about the male gaze, was really talking about film, but we can apply it to basically anything. I think this cover from GQ here from April 20th, 2003. Here we've got the supermodel Naomi Campbell. She is photographed naked. She is the receiver of a male gaze. This is a magazine aimed at men, right? Look at how she's posed. She's lying down. She's looking up at us. It's a slightly high angle shot. We're looking down on her. This puts the viewer, the assumed male, heterosexual, heteronormative viewer, it puts us in a position of power and authority. She looks, especially with her arms behind her in this sort of like an almost pose of surrender. It puts her in a submissive, passive pose. It's a weak pose. Gives us power over her. I mean, often it's not to mention the fact that there's, you know, a racial element here as well. It's not quite unusual to see a woman of colour on the front cover of these magazines, although it's becoming increasingly common in the last few years. Um, Vogue, for example, has completely embraced women of colour on this editorial team. Is now largely black, which is interesting. So this is an example of a female body being eroticized for the pleasure of the perceived male viewer. So the man is looking at her as an ideal partner. That's the preferred reading from a Stuart Hall point of view, the hegemonic, the dominant reading. Obviously, a woman looking at her might be seeing her as an ideal self. A lesbian reading would be possibly an ideal self and an ideal partner. So what Laura Mulvey was talking about is that when women, what do you do when anyone watches a film or looks at any kind of cultural product, they're looking for a reflection. They're looking for a mirror, essentially, something that reflects them. And if you're a straight white male who's middle class, you're going to see that everywhere. You're going to see people just like you everywhere, represented in the media everywhere. But if you are in some case an out group, if you are a woman, if you are a gay man, if you're a lesbian, if you're a person of colour, you are going to struggle to see that much in the way of positive representations that look like you, that reflect you. So, especially if, the products are presented from a male point of view, a woman looking at that is going to have to find some way of it reflecting her. So, women are encouraged to look at other women and indeed look at themselves from a male gaze. They're encouraged to think of themselves in terms of their value, their cultural value, their exchange value to men. Basically, what it's saying is that you should be beautiful, you should be sexually available, you should be submissive to men. That is what your value, your commodity exchange value is. That's what your capital is. It's your looks and your sexuality. And if you don't have either of them, you're worthless. So that's the kind of image that women are being bombarded with all the time. Increasingly, men are suffering from the same thing. Again, it's even worse if you're a person of colour, or if you're, in some ways, you're not meeting the societal expectations of body norms, whether that's because of some kind of disability, for example. The list goes on. So, we can have a male gaze, right? But can you have a female gaze? Now, this is debatable. Can you have a gay male gaze or queer gaze? Equally debatable. I found this quote in an essay by Aaron Lee Christian. We have to address the fact that the guy who's writing about queer theory is called Man Love. Sorry, but that is hilarious. Talk about normative determinism. But anyway, Man Love cites the work of Steve Neale. Yep, that's Steve Neale, the one who talked about genre theory. In 1983, Steve Neale argued that the manner in which Mulvey describes the passive feminine sense of to be looked at-ness can be applied to images of masculinity, both with regard to heterosexual female and gay identifications. So for Steve Neale, yes, you can have a female gaze. Women can objectify men. Men can be objectified for a female gaze. You know, think of the famous Diet Coke advert where the women are watching some guy mow a lawn and he takes his t-shirt off because he gets Coke all over it and they staring at him slack-jawed, right? Yeah, that's a female gaze. Equally, you can have a gay or queer gaze in which men can objectify other men. So for Steve Neale, yes, you can have a female gaze and a gay male gaze. Others, however, debate that and argue you can't, because we live in a patriarchal society, because we live in a society that assumes a heteronormative, so in other words, the normality is white, heterosexual, and male, and anything that doesn't fit into that little box is othered, is different. It's not normal. They are outgroups. Okay? If you don't fit into those categories, then you lack power. And this is all about power. Who has power and who doesn't have power. So, from a Mulvey point of view, only straight white men have the power to gaze. And that has to be at women, because women have to be subordinate. So women don't have the power to gaze at men in the same way. Gay men can gaze at other gay men, but they're looking at someone who's in theory their equal. So it doesn't have quite the same power associations. Having said that, Anne Kaplan, talking in her essay from 1983, Is the Gaze Male? She says there can be a female gaze, possibly. There can only be a female gaze when the woman takes on a masculine role, though, and lays down the traditional feminine characteristics. So to have that, they have to symbolically become masculine. They can't be feminine and have a female gaze. They have to be masculinized. So they have to have some kind of power over who they're gazing at. Now maybe we could bring social class into this. If you are of a higher social class than the person, if the woman is of a higher social class than the man they are objectifying, then that gives them a level of power. So maybe that comes into it. Lorraine Gammon and Margaret Marshmont, in their book The Female Gaze, says that men in popular media often have control over the gaze while women are controlled by it. Gammon and Marshmont wonder whether the gaze is always male in one way or another. They talk about what happens if there are no men, nothing other than men to gaze at, like in a war movie or a western, for example. But how does it work in gay relationships? Kasia Silverman is committed to the idea of both male and female subjects can be carriers of the gaze, because a man cannot always be a controlling subject, just as the woman is not always a passive object. Teresa de Laurentis argues that the female spectator, regardless of the sex of the characters, does not necessarily have to take a male recipient position, and is rather involved in double identification with both active and passive subject positions. She closes her argument by saying that even if the male body were feminized, there can only be one desired body that is visible, the female, and you can't have a simple role reversal because of those power structures, because women are, subservient and objectified in a patriarchal society. So the argument is that women can't have enough power to have a gaze. But having said that, luckily I screenshotted this of Attitude earlier. Right. Look at it. It's much like that image of Naomi Campbell. Reclining. Passive. It's a high angle shot. We're looking down on him. That puts us in a position of power. It puts him in a submissive position. right? We've got power over him. We're bigger. We're looking down at him, right? He is on display for us, right? He is being very much sexualized and objectified, right? This is all about his body. It's all about his face. You know, he's not on there because of the sharpness of his wit. He's not on this photograph because he's, you know, intelligent or caring or good at his job. He's there as a sex object to be objectified by a male viewer, but it's a gay male viewer. So we can quote about this being a queer gaze, a gay male gaze. Um, but it's not the same as him being a woman. He is feminized in this mise en scène, in the cinematography, but he is still a man. So he's never going to be, you know, inferior, people like this would argue, in the same way that women are, which is what Lord and Mulvey argument would be. But having said that, in a society where, you know, homosexuality is still considered less so than it used to be, but still a little bit considered to be deviant, to be an out group, to be a subculture, to be not normal, it renders the gay subject of the gaze to be weak, to be passive, to be inferior. So maybe there can be a queer gaze. I don't know the right answer to that. There may not be a right answer to that. Cleverer people than me have been debating it for decades. Personally, I think the difference is how the person is being represented. If we go back to these images here, notice the difference. Yes, we've got much more passive images, but in all of these photographs, look at how active and strong these men look. In this one in particular, we're looking up to him. It's a low angle shot. So yes, they're sexualized, yes, they're objectified, but in these cases, they're coming from a position of strength. Of, in some cases, a little bit dominant. So it's a complicated subject. Anyway, that's enough for now. You know where I am if you want to go any more help. I've sent you out the PowerPoint. I've sent you the media pack. Don't forget to look at what's in your textbooks. The next video I do will just be looking at the magazine. The website itself. Okay, if there's anything there you don't understood, let me know. I'll talk to you next time.